Well, the Dallas Stars had a very crazy weekend, and it's only going to get crazier this week. On today's show, we'll talk about the games from the weekend, talk about some of the updates as far as the NHL schedule, and then, of course, give you a preview of tonight's matchup between the Stars and the Minnesota Wild. All of this coming up on a Monday edition of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, and you are locked on the Dallas Stars on this Monday, December 20th. 5 more days till Christmas, folks. Get excited. Get excited for Dallas Stars game day tonight, taking on the Wild at the American Airlines Center. We'll talk about that game near the end of the show. But before we jump into everything, got to take a moment and say thank you for stopping by today's episode of Locked On Stars. Whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe and follow the podcast wherever you get your podcast at, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. The Locked On Stars podcast is free anywhere that you can find it. Well, jumping right into today's show, because we have a lot to talk about, definitely got to start the show out and give my well wishes and say that my prayers are going out to Tanner Kero and his family. As I'm sure many of you saw, he took a very, very scary hit from Brett Connolly of the Chicago Blackhawks. Don't think Connolly is necessarily a dirty player. I know Coach Bowness made that claim afterwards. I think it was just kind of a bang-bang play. Obviously, I think that Connolly meant to make that hit, but did not know the degree to which the hit would be made. And I'm sure many of you saw, took a nasty fall on the ice, took a nasty hit, had to be stretched off the ice. But thankfully posted later that he was okay, that he was in recovery, he was responsive with his family. So very, very good news to hear that. Very scary moment. I was watching the game on my phone. I was not in the building, but just from watching there, I could tell the building was very silent. Just a lot of emotions running through that building. Very tense, very scary moment. Always so scary to see moments like that. But thankfully, he's okay. Joe Pavelski, his teammate, got very, very emotional post-game when talking about Tanner, mentioning that he's a great guy, very soft-spoken, but an incredibly hard worker, a guy that doesn't miss a day, as Pavelski put it. And he's part of this Dallas Stars family. I think that we are quick to forget, that these guys that play these games, whether it's the NHL or another sport, these are human beings that, have lives and have emotions and feel pain and feel, when their friends or, basically family members are experiencing pain themselves. And if you watch Joe Pavelski's post-game press conference, or you've just been following his career in the NHL, that he took a pretty big hit in the 2019 playoffs. And, he talks about how his teammates in San Jose rallied around him when that happened and, supported him and walked with him through his road of recovery. And he ultimately came back and helped that San Jose Sharks team on their playoff run back in 2019 all the way to the final round of the Western Conference playoffs. But yeah, just kind of a sobering moment, I'm sure, for the Stars team, as well as just us as hockey fans, to know, these guys play fast, they play with heart, they play with a lot of emotion. But certainly, things like that happen. It's unfortunate. It sucks. You hate to see any player, whether he's a Dallas Stars player or they play for any of the other teams in this league. You hate to see a guy have to get stretched off the ice. But thankfully, Tanner Kero is okay. I know that myself, as well as the rest of the Stars fans, Stars Nation, are praying for a quick recovery for him, that we can see him back out on the ice soon. Because if Joe Pavelski's emotions were any indication, we know that he is loved in that locker room. And even if he doesn't put up the big numbers, that doesn't matter. Like I said, he's a part of that locker room, a member of the Dallas Stars family. And so we wish him the best and hope that we will see him back on the ice soon, back to his normal self, back 100% healthy. But in other Stars news, we'll get to the games from the weekend on Friday and Saturday in just a bit. But got to talk about some updates as far as NHL scheduling goes for this next week. Yesterday on Sunday around the afternoon, around 4 o'clock, the NHL announced that all games between Canadian and American teams would be postponed from now until December 23rd, which would have been the last day before the NHL kind of went on a Christmas break, which would have, gone through the 24th, 25th, and 26th, and games would have resumed on the 27th of December to give some guys off for Christmas to spend time with family and friends. But there's quite a few games that are being affected, especially in the back part of the week on the 22nd and the 23rd. Looking at all the games that have been postponed and will be rescheduled down the line, that is important to note. The NHL did mention that all of these games should be and will be rescheduled at some point, though, at the time of recording this. We do not know when that will be. But on the 20th of December, the New York Islanders were supposed to travel to Edmonton to face the Oilers. That game has been postponed. On the 21st, St. Louis was supposed to go to Ottawa, Vancouver at San Jose. That's been canceled. On the 22nd, this is the big one for Stars fans. Winnipeg at Dallas, Montreal at the New York Rangers, Edmonton at Los Angeles. And then the 23rd is the big day. St. Louis at Toronto, Carolina, Ottawa, Montreal, New Jersey, Anaheim, Vancouver, and Edmonton, San Jose. Again, the big one for the Dallas Stars and Dallas Stars fans to make note of is December 22nd against the Winnipeg Jets. Winnipeg will not be making the trip to the American Airlines Center, at least this week. Again, all these games will be rescheduled at some point. We don't know when that's going to be. Of course, this could just be kind of the beginning of maybe some things like this, hopefully with this Christmas break that's coming up for the NHL players, maybe the spread of COVID or, just in general, maybe some of the positive test, whatnot, will hopefully slow down a bit because I know, and as we'll talk about here a little bit later in the show, the Wild are one of many teams that have already faced their fair share of postponements and, the past few weeks. And even after they played the Stars, their game that they were supposed to play against the Red Wings also being postponed. And so hopefully maybe with a little bit of a pause in some of the games and some of the travel across borders, it'll slow down. Still, teams in America will be traveling, and I guess teams that are playing each other in Canada are traveling still, so it could still maybe spread that way, or there could be people getting exposed and whatnot. But hopefully this won't continue on because this is just going to be a very messy way to continue the season. So hopefully a little bit of a pause here, maybe a somewhat slow down of travel, at least between countries, will help things. It's hard to tell. It's a hard thing to predict and truly, just hard to read. And so hopefully we won't see too many more postponements or game cancellations, at least at this time, because it just throws off the flow of the season. And yeah, I know it makes it very hard trying to cover the NHL, and I know it makes it hard for fans as well. You make plans to go to games or get together with friends for a game, and plans can get thrown awry. And so hopefully we'll get some clarity over the whole situation as far as game postponements go over the coming weeks, and hopefully things get cleared up and get a little better here in the coming days. Well, coming up next, we'll take a moment and recap and take a little bit of a deeper look into some of the games from this weekend for the Dallas Stars, mostly Saturday's win over the Chicago Blackhawks, but we will touch on that Friday night game against the Blues a little bit as well. But before we do that, I do want to take a moment and say thank you to one of the sponsors of today's episode, and that is Built Bar. This holiday season, grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or even better than a candy bar. Built Bar is filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavor, and covered in chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, and high in protein. So you get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. Built Bar gives you that extra fuel that you need to bust down those small doors and battle those holiday shoppers. Or if you're just standing in endless shopping lines, Built Bar can give you that extra something to keep you going. So throw it in your jacket or your purse because you never know when you might need it. Do you like some of those marshmallow-filled treats around the holidays? You need to get your hands on Built Bar Puffs. They're light, fluffy, and marshmallowy through and through. Different flavors, all covered in chocolate. Taste so good, you won't believe that they're filled with protein. You can go to Built.com right now and use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Again, you can get 15% off your order when you use the code LOCKED15 at Built.com. Moving on to the next segment of today's episode of Locked On Stars, your first listen of the day. I want to take a moment and talk about some of the games that the Dallas Stars played in over the weekend on Friday night at St. Louis against the Blues, and then, of course, at home against the Chicago Blackhawks. And we won't touch on the Friday game too much because it looked like the Stars were trying to pretend they were playing a hockey game rather than actually playing in one. The Stars lost 4-1 to St. Louis, the exact same score as Tuesday night's date with the Blues back at the American Airlines Center. Jason Robertson saves the Stars from getting shut out for the second time this season. I believe Pavelski and Klingberg were credited with the assists on that play. And the Stars were just simply outplayed in every facet of the game, whether that's shots on goals, penalties, power plays, face-off circle. I think I said shots on goal. I hadn't said face-offs yet. Hits, steals, giveaways, takeaways, just did not play well. That's the end of the story there. St. Louis took advantage of that because St. Louis is a good team filled with a lot of talent. It took a while for them to build that lead and establish that 4-1 lead, but it eventually did happen overtime, and the Stars came away with from that game with their 5th straight loss. But thankfully, the Stars got back on track on Saturday night against the St. Louis Blues with a 4-3 win in overtime. Great goal from John Klingberg. His first of the season came at a very, very good time. A great setup play. Dallas was on the power play in overtime, so they had 4 on the ice to Chicago's 3, and they ran a really, really nice play to give Klingberg an open look at the net, and he, of course, put it through for his first goal of the season and getting the Stars back on track and back in the win column for the first time since the end of that 7-game win streak. That was super fun, but feels like a very, very distant memory. And as great as this game was, as great as it was, to get 2 points and to reach 30 points this season for the Stars, this game shouldn't have gone into overtime. Dallas had a 3-1 lead at one point. That first goal that they scored, definitely credit to Chicago for running, some nice offense on the power play to get a good look at the net. But that second goal came off of a Yanni Hakanpää stick break. Dylan Strome able to benefit from that. Weird kind of turnover play with Hakanpää stick breaking, and Dallas just not able to get back and recover in time. And then, of course, the third goal that Chicago scored, just a really, really bad zone clearing attempt from Roope Hintz. Just a play that felt very unlike him. A very smart player, normally executes things like that, the little things like that very well. Roope does. And of course, Chicago capitalizes on that as well with about 8 minutes left in the third. Thankfully, they did not take the lead in the third period and keep Dallas out of the question of getting points. So going to overtime at least guaranteed Dallas 1 point, but great news that Dallas is able to come away with 2. As ugly as it was at times, they needed to get that win. They needed to get back on track, especially needed to get a win against a team like Chicago, who they're better than. I don't think there's any question about that. Chicago has been struggling quite a bit this season. They seem to find their footing at times, but overall not having the best season, especially compared to some of the other teams in the division. Certainly great to see Dallas get the win, but I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that Dallas won this game. Rather, I think Chicago lost this game. You look at, what they did in the game with 25 penalty minutes. They were outshot 39-23. They lost in the faceoff circle 61-39 percentage-wise, 61% in favor of Dallas. And I mean, again, Dallas comes away with the win. They do beat an inferior opponent, but they need to find ways to play cleaner games against some of these teams. Even in some of their games against Arizona this season, had a little bit of trouble there. Not necessarily the most sound wins, but they still found ways to win nonetheless, which is good. But especially games like that, much better for the confidence of the team to, beat those teams from the get-go and not allow them to get back in the game. Because like I said, Dallas had a 3-1 lead at one point in this game, and they allowed Chicago to kind of scrap their way back and tie it and force overtime, which could have proven costly for the Stars, and they could have lost their 6th in a row, potentially looking to mirror the win streak at 7 going into a very dangerous matchup with this Minnesota Wild team that we'll talk about here in just a bit. But also to cut Dallas a little bit of slack, they were playing the second game of a back-to-back, the first of those games being on the road against St. Louis. But overall, good that they're back in the win column. Good that they got a win against a divisional opponent. Good that they got a win for Tanner Kero after seeing his scary injury. I know Joe Pavelski dedicated that win to Tanner. So very great to see that. A little bit of good to see from the Dallas Stars team over the weekend, but not a whole lot of great. But I think that the win against Chicago was a step in the right direction. The top line, were the guys that scored a lot this weekend outside of the Klingberg game winner. Robo obviously scoring on Friday, and then Joe Pavelski getting 2 goals in the first period to put the Stars up 2-0, and then Jason Robertson getting the 3rd goal of the game for the Stars after Chicago's first goal. I was getting confused there for a second, but Jason Robertson with a nice move to get the 3rd goal for the Stars. So it seems that the top line is getting back to their old tricks. We saw them kind of cool off a little bit during this losing skid. Roope was, out for some of those games, but now he seems to be getting back and getting a little bit better. Again, that zone clearing attempt from him was not the best thing that we've seen from him ever. But I think he's just going to continue to get healthy and get back to being 100%. As we know, he was playing some in the recent games, but maybe not back to fully healthy after having his non-COVID related illness. But I think that this top line is going to be ready to go tonight against Minnesota, and Dallas desperately needs them if they have any shot of being competitive in this game. And we will give you a quick preview of this game in just a bit after we take a moment and say thank you to another sponsor of today's episode. That is BetOnline.ag. BetOnline has you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football season continues to march towards the playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to the new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. And to close out today's episode of Locked On Stars, I want to take a moment and give you a preview of tonight's matchup between Dallas and Minnesota at the American Airlines Center. A huge matchup for both teams. Minnesota looking to assert their dominance as the top dog in the division, top dog in the conference. And Dallas looking, to keep their winning ways going and to potentially start another win streak would be very, very nice. But I'm not going to do this all by myself. Let's take a moment and check out this quick video from Seth Topal of Locked On Wild to get caught up to speed on everything that's been happening in Minnesota since these teams last met up back in November.
Hey everybody, Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, here on Locked On Stars for a little preview of tonight's game against the Dallas Stars from a Wild perspective. Obviously, it's been a minute since these two teams have squared off, with the Wild winning back on November 18th by a score of 7-2. After that, the Wild went on their Florida road trip, taking on the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning, losing both games 5-4, but showing a good comeback in each, as the Wild did pick up a point in that game against the Lightning, losing 5-4 in a shootout. After that, things heated up a little bit as the Wild ended up going on an 8-game winning streak, beating New Jersey 3-2 in a shootout, Winnipeg 7-1, Tampa Bay 4-2, Arizona 5-2, New Jersey again 5-2, Toronto 4-3 in a shootout, Edmonton 4-1, and San Jose 5-2, before losing the final two legs of that West Coast road trip to the LA Kings 2-1. And the Vegas Golden Knights 6-4. And then the COVID postponements started to hit as the Wild had this past Tuesday's game against Carolina postponed. They then lost one at home that they'll probably want to have back, 3-2 in a shootout to the Buffalo Sabres, and had both the Florida Panthers game this past weekend and this Thursday's game against the Detroit Red Wings postponed as well. So Wild were red hot with 8 wins in a row, have cooled some, and now have kind of gone cold with the lack of games that they've had in front of them. So should be an exciting matchup here in this game tonight. The Wild just glad to be playing and being one of the few teams in the league without any COVID-19 issues. So looking forward to this matchup tonight, because we haven't seen the Wild play in over a week. And it'll be nice to have them back despite being on the road. Should be a great matchup between these two teams. For more on the Minnesota Wild, make sure to hop over to Locked On Wild wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thank you, Seth. I appreciate it. Like he said in his video, guys, if you want more information on the Wild, you can go check Seth out at Locked On Wild, wherever you get your podcast at, for free. But like he said, Minnesota went on a very, very good win streak, 8 games, around the same time that Dallas was on their 7-game win streak. Minnesota was basically matching them step for step, beating their opponents as well. And they find themselves at the top of the Western Conference with 40 points, currently tied with the Vegas Golden Knights and the Anaheim Ducks. And some other Central Division teams like Nashville, St. Louis, Colorado, not too far behind. But again, Minnesota proving to be one of, if not the best team in the conference up to this point in the season. A very, very dangerous team, very scary team, led by Kirill Kaprizov, obviously the winner of the Calder Trophy last season, taking it from Jason Robertson. He has 33 points on the season, so no sophomore slump from the Calder Trophy finalist and Robertson, but also no sophomore slump from the winner and Kirill Kaprizov. He is leading his team very, very well and has this team primed for an offensive explosion any given night. So the Stars defense will need to come ready, need to come prepared for everything that this Minnesota team is going to throw their way. But I think the interesting thing to watch in this game will be to see how Minnesota plays, because they have not really played since Thursday, December 16th, which doesn't feel like that long of a time, but they were supposed to have a game against Florida this weekend, but that game got postponed due to COVID. And so I'm very interested to see how this Minnesota team comes out. Will they come out flat? Will they come out unprepared and maybe not quite up to the conditioning level that they need to be at? Or will they be totally fine? I think it's tough to say, just because they haven't really had moments like this where their schedule's been thrown out of whack. I think that messes with their team mentally. They've had, their game against Carolina canceled last Tuesday. They had their game against Florida canceled this weekend. And then after playing Dallas, they were supposed to play a game against the Red Wings. That game has now been postponed due to COVID. And so I'm curious to see how all of that is going to affect this Minnesota team on the mental side of things. Can Dallas get the upper hand and take advantage of a team that hasn't played since Thursday? Or will they be totally fine? I could be just kind of speculating on that. Clearly, this is one of the best teams in the National Hockey League this season. So you can't just assume that they're going to come out ill-prepared and come out flat. You need to be expecting the best from them night in and night out as they look to defend their spot at the top of the conference and potentially work their way up to the top spot in the entire league. So it's going to be very, very fun to watch this game. I think this is a very different Dallas Stars team than when these teams met up back in November when Dallas lost 7-2. And I sure hope that Dallas plays that way. I don't think that this 5-game losing streak that Dallas has just gotten off of is reflective of who they really are as a team. I think that was just a tough stretch. I think that the true Dallas Stars of this 2021-2022 season could be found back during the 7-game win streak. And I expect to see a lot of what we saw during that streak against this Minnesota team, because a lot of those games in the win streak, if you remember, were against some of the best teams in the league, like Edmonton, Colorado, Carolina, teams like that. Dallas was beating teams like that and beating them quite soundly, beating them by quite a few goals. So I expect Dallas to come out ready to go, on fire, knowing what's at stake, knowing who they're playing and what happened to them last time they matched up. I think that's going to be fresh on these guys' minds, wanting to get revenge on home ice in front of the fans and, get the second win in a row and get things rolling to potentially go on another big run and try to climb back up the ranks of this crowded, chaotic Central Division. And I think, this will be a weird week for the Stars because, as we mentioned earlier, their game against Winnipeg has now been postponed, but I think that there's some potential there for good. Hopefully Dallas will be able to recover well between tonight's game, and then they'll play Chicago again on the 23rd. That would have been another time that they're playing Chicago in the second game of a back-to-back, but this time they will be traveling to the Windy City to take on the Blackhawks. And so hopefully they'll have some time after this game, win or loss, to recover and rest, get to travel normally, and then play Chicago again on the 23rd and hopefully get another win there because hopefully they're able to take what they've learned from that game, the close overtime win against the Blackhawks, make some adjustments, make the proper changes, and they'll know who they're up against. And they can look to get maybe a little bit more of a sound win against the Blackhawks on the road. But we're looking too far ahead. They need to focus on tonight's matchup, and I'm very excited to see how the Stars team matches up with this Minnesota Wild team that embarrassed them last time. So always going to be exciting when these two teams get together, and I expect tonight to be no different. As far as predictions go, give me the Stars in a close 5-4 game, potentially overtime, and give me Rupe Hintz with the first goal. I think the top line is going to have to lead the way for the Stars tonight, and they're going to have to show up and show out if Dallas wants to win this game. And I expect those guys to be up to the challenge because they've most times been up to the challenge this season whenever they play these big name opponents. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen of the day the Locked On Bets podcast, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. Be sure to tune into tomorrow's episode for a full breakdown of tonight's matchup between the Stars and Wild. You won't want to miss it. Be sure to subscribe and follow the Locked On Stars podcast wherever you get your podcast at, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. And of course, be sure to leave a review if you like what you hear. And you can find me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis. That's at DANE 2_LEWIS. You can also find the show on Twitter at Locked On Stars. But again, that's going to do it for me today. Hope you guys have a great Monday. Enjoy the game if you're going to be at the American Airlines Center, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Have a great day, Stars fans.